My first near-death experience was when I was 15, and I was very sick. It was an extended length of illness. And during the night, I looked up at the ceiling, and the whole ceiling turned to a sky of clouds. Everything was bubbling clouds. And then in the clouds that were above me came a beautiful woman gliding in on seemingly the most beautiful music I ever heard. She had a white gown on. It was layers of lace, and she had long, dark brown hair, almost black, hanging down mid-back, and she was gorgeous. Well, I thought of her as the music box lady because the music that she flew in on. The beautiful girl in my first near-death experience is my daughter. She, at that time, she was not going to be born until 15 years later. It was only after she was in college and somebody had taken a picture of her in exactly the same pose, well, close to the same pose, that I recognized that was the music box lady. No doubt that was her. And she was reminding me that if we had a contract, and if I didn't get back into my body that night, she wouldn't be born 15 years later.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
We are here with Jeanette Tarantino, and she has had 3 near-death experiences that really changed her life. And I want to welcome you, Jeanette. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So out of the 3 near-death experiences, which one do you consider that is the most important?
The third, yeah, because that was the most life-changing, and it showed me all the rest.
Can you take us back to the day when it happened?
My husband and I, at that time, were married and living on a ranch. We lived outside the city, yet close enough that we could drive into our jobs. And I had a network coordinator position for a large snack food company, and everything I did was analytical. And during this time frame, I developed what I thought was an allergy that would go away as the seasons changed. And as we did our chores outside, I would get really congested. And so I thought it would go away when the weather changed, but it didn't. It just continued to get worse. And so I would take decongestants when I went in the house to clear up my breathing so that I could sleep at night, because it was tough to breathe. One night it was extremely bad, and I went to bed and I propped 3 pillows on top of each other so that I'd be at a 45-degree angle so I could sleep better, because I always slept on my back with my hands over my tummy. And I fell asleep, but sometime during the night, I felt my chest starting to hurt, and I could not breathe. I couldn't get any air. My breathing had been cut off. I felt like I reached for my husband with my left hand because he was laying on that side, but I couldn't feel him. And I called for him, and I said, "Gavin, please help me, please help me." And he didn't respond. And then all of a sudden, I was out of my body, looking down on myself and my husband laying in bed beside me. But my hands were still over my tummy, and I was still laying on my back. So it was obviously my spirit arm that had reached for him, and it was my spirit voice that had called for him. And that's why he couldn't hear me. And that's why we can't hear spirits in the other realm, because we can't hear them. And I was floating I had in a black velvetiness of love. And I felt like I had taken the biggest, freshest breath that I had ever had, and I felt absolutely free. And I felt like I was on the best spa day that I ever had, and I felt like I was floating face up in a pool, but there was no water. I was just floating in a zero gravity environment. And while I floated face up, everything above me was black. There wasn't any stars. And a silver cord flew by from left to my right, real slow, like in outer space. And I didn't know what that was, but come to find out later, that silver cord is the tether that connects our spirit body to our to the heavenly realm. And it's also referred to biblically as the silver cord that once it snaps, we go home to heaven. And I didn't learn that until much later. And while I saw the silver cord float by, I noticed that there was a pin of light coming off to my right, which would be your left, I guess you could say. It was off to my right from how I was floating. And it was coming in a slight S-shaped curve. And I wasn't worried about it. I wasn't frightened about anything that was happening because I was just embraced in all this love, tranquility, and just, it was awesome, awesome. And then I noticed something going on down at my physical body because you could see everywhere at the time. And I noticed movement down there. So my attention went down there and I could see a blue shimmering essence lifting out of my physical legs. And it was starting to bubble up out. It came out of my ankles, then my shins, and then up out of my thighs. And just by the desire to see what it was, I was down at my waistline watching this energy lift up out of my body. And why I could watch this leaving my body is because I was the spirit that had already left the upper part of my body. And I was now watching the remainder of my spirit leaving the lower half of my body because I had stretched to exit the body. And that was the part that was left behind. So as I floated there, I also noticed another pin of light coming toward me from the left, coming forward. But when that energy left the body, it started pulling up toward me and to where I was, the upper part of the body, and it was in energy form. And then I transformed. All my energy came together and it transformed into the shape of an orb. And I was then a glowing light of an orb sitting in a wand of love. And I can explain this is because I felt while I was basking in this love, I could feel my arms energetically extended out to my side, but they were elongated because they weren't in the physical form. So as I changed, my arms pulled in and crossed like this, and then I could feel the energy pull up, and that's when I transformed, and my vision went through a fishbowl effect as it changed, and then it was perfect after I was in the orb shape. So there's a great video on YouTube. It's called the Zinc Spark. It's about the zinc spark and where creation, when the egg is activated, a spark happens. And I find it very interesting that we start as a spark of light, and I left my body and became an orb of light. So we start as light and we end as light because we are part of creation, the part of God's light creation, whatever you want to call him, source. So we go back to source as a spark of light. I was sitting in this wand of love, and the light that came in was an orb of light. Flew into my room, and it grew up into a spiritual being who, and at first thought, I thought it was Jesus. And I knew it was Jesus, and he loved me no matter what. But then I discounted that because I thought, why would he come for me? I'm nobody, so I'm nothing special. So I started describing him as a light being. But this was Jesus, and he loved me no matter what. And he loves every one of us the same. And then this light that had come from the left was now beside Jesus, and it was a living light of love. It was God in his energetic form. He had bubbling clouds around him, which I find interesting because biblically it says he will come in the clouds. So he came through the darkness, through the clouds, just like it said. So I find certain parts biblically very interesting. I could feel the colors coming out of the light, even though it was white. It was so white and was bright, but it didn't hurt my eyes. I could look at it with no problems. And then Jesus held his hand out to me, his right hand in a palm up, with a gesture of "Come, take my hand." And then he said, "It's time to come home, Jan." And I thought about my daughter because we're very close, and she's my youngest. And I thought, I wonder how she's going to take my death. And just because I thought that, Jesus answered, "She'll be okay." I wanted to go to heaven because, who would not want to be in this loving environment? It was fantastic. But they were trying to convince me to stay. God reached out his rainbow arms. He reached out his rainbow arms and he embraced me. And I felt like my back was against his chest, even though he didn't have a chest, but that's how it physically felt to me. And he had his arms around me, even though there were no arms, it was all rainbow energy. And then he showed me a life review, but it wasn't a life review in the normal sense. It was moments of my life from my that have already happened and some that I didn't recognize yet. And he told me, understand these moments, they matter. And so I wanted to understand them in heaven. Okay, I'll go to heaven and I'll look down on these things and find out what they're all about. But they wouldn't have that. So he withdrew, and I was again in front of both of them. And the angels came for me, and they were energetic forms of yellow and white and kind of gold mixed, radiating light. And they touched I transformed from the orb of light then into the shape of a person. I was white translucent at that point. So this shows that our spirit can change forms as it needs or it desires, depending on what the situation was. The angels touched my arms above my elbows and lifted me way into the sky. And I was above, several hundred feet above the ranch, and I could see the inside of the ranch and the outside, the lay of the land and the houses around me. And I wanted to, then I noticed that there was 2 pins of light. Since we lived in the country, it was gravel roads, coming up the gravel roads. And they were so far in the distance, they were just teeny tiny lights. Yet I could feel like I was riding in that vehicle. I could see down the road, I could see behind me, and it was an ambulance that was coming to discover my body. But what the angels had done is they had jumped me ahead in time so that I could see, what would happen if I died. And so I saw my husband frantic in the house below, and this was the ambulance that was coming, and eventually the fire department came too. And they were talking in the living room and in the kitchen area. We had a small two-bedroom house at the time, we built on later. I was going to die, and I was okay with that. And I wanted to go to heaven. In that meantime, I had become one with everything. I could hear the tires, like my ear was right next to the tire. I could feel the bumps in the road as the ambulance drove down the road. And as it turned into our lane, there's one part in the driveway that goes up to the house, and I could feel the lurch when it hit that bump that always would wash out when the rains would come. I could hear the clanking of the equipment inside the vehicle too. And yet I was still hundreds of feet in the air, and I could see my husband down there had all perspectives, which shows us that in spirit we become one with the universe, and we can be in all places at all times. Because when I saw that blue spirit energy leave my body, I knew that was my sliver of the Creator's spirit and that lives inside of us. So our spirit is our share of God's or the Creator's spirit that lives inside of us and is with us through that tether. So that's why they say they live life and experience life with us, because they really do, because he's living our lives, every one of us, and experiencing life through us, through our spirit, which is part of his spirit too. I found that very fascinating. And it's very liberating to know that he is always with us. And that's that still small voice that we hear, the thoughts that pop into our head. That's the guidance system that guides us. And so if you realize that our spirit is always communicating with us, and we have a host of other spiritual beings like the angels that are around us as well. And because I still wanted to go to heaven, I didn't care about dying. I wanted to go. Then all of a sudden I was back down in front of Jesus, and I was on the right at the edge of entering God's light into heaven. But they showed me one more image. And that image was of my middle child, Kurt. And I knew when I saw his image, just by seeing his image, I knew that something was going to happen to him in the future. And if I wasn't there for him, his life may not go down a path that would be good for him. So naturally, I love my children. And that was at the point when I said, I'm not ready to go yet. And Jesus nodded his head and smiled, even though I couldn't see his face because he was glowing. He radiated energy all around him, and his face was glowing too. And so I couldn't see his face clearly. I drew his picture on my website, and I can't identify the features of his face, but I could see his hair, and he had a white gown down to the floor, tied at the waist with a rope, and he had sleeves that hung from his wrists, and he was in the welcoming pose, just like they traditionally are when he first came. So I decided to stay, and then I turned back into my blue spirit body, and I sat my butt down in Jan's butt that's on the bed, and I slipped a spirit foot into each of her physical legs, and I grabbed my spirit knees and I rocked back and forth until I could get up the momentum to lay back in her body, snap in, and help her sit up and gasp for air, which I did. And then I had to live my life as Janet, wondering when the other shoe was going to drop for my son, Kurt. Well, this life review that I was shown revealed that some unusual experiences I had during my younger days. My first near-death experience was when I was 15, and I was very sick, and my mom stayed in bed with me to take care of me. One time during the night, it was an extended length of illness. And during the night, I looked up at the ceiling, and the light had been turned off for the night, yet the room was kind of on a light glow. And then I felt like I fell backwards, even though I was laying in bed. But what had really happened was my spirit had dropped out of my body. And then in spirit form, when I looked up at the ceiling, the whole ceiling turned to a cloud, a sky of clouds. Everything was bubbling clouds. And then in the clouds that were above me, there was two spinning motions, one on the right side of the room, one on the left side of the room. And those spinning motions then opened up tunnels into two other worlds. On this world, in this tunnel, when I looked through it, I saw a sumo wrestler in a white room, in a white light, and all he did was watch me. Even though he'd get up and move, and he was moving on fast motion, just like a film whipping around at the end, he always kept his eyes locked on me. And then I heard music coming from the other tunnel. And so I looked over there, and into that tunnel came a beautiful woman gliding in on seemingly the most beautiful music I ever heard. She had a white gown on, it was layers of lace, and she had long, dark brown hair, almost black, hanging down mid-back, and she was gorgeous. when she entered, I was so fascinating with her dress because I had worked that summer to save money so I could get some nice clothing for high school because I was just going to start high school. It was transferring from middle school to high school, and this was the dating age and all the school activities I was looking forward to. So I wanted some clothes, and so I was so focused on her dress, I was all of a sudden flying around her. I could see the lace eyelets, even like they were caverns, because I had in energy form, we can get large, we can contract and get small. And I flew through the eyelets of her dress like I was a skier going down a hill. I could feel the wind blowing through my hair as I whipped in and out of these eyelets as I went around the dress. And then I had uh, went back to above my body. Well, I thought of her as the music box lady because the music that she flew in on. And also I thought of her as Daddy's little girl because at one point in time she moved, she was talking to the sumo wrestler. They were communicating about me, but I wasn't allowed to listen. And at one point she moves up and away and then eventually comes back. And when she moved up and away, I thought Daddy's putting her up on a pedestal. And when she came back, they continued their conversation. Then all of a sudden it ended and they both transformed into orbs of light again and left the room. They flew through the wall. They hovered in the side window for a while and discussing me because I could actually kind of see them turn. And one left and went down the side of the house, which left one to watch me, which was probably the sumo wrestler because all he did was watch me, never communicated. It was always watching me. And then the other orb came back again, and then they both left. And then I settled back into my body and woke up and got sick again. And so it was interesting to know that in the third near-death experiences, I was out of my body looking in. And this one, I was in this world looking through two tunnels into two different worlds. And the background of where the beautiful lady was all blackness. So it was the universe. And the sumo wrestler, I come to find out, is my guide that's here to watch and protect me. And he's always with me, watching and guiding me.
You mentioned that in your third near-death experience, you were shown your first near-death experience.
This was one of the moments that I was shown because he was showing me moments of my life, some things that had already happened and some things that hadn't. And so this was part of the moments that he had shown me that had already happened. And I didn't have an explanation for that. I just tucked it away at that time because I was too interested in school and dating. I didn't want to think about that. So I always never forgot it. I just put it aside and went on with my life. And then life went on. And when I was married and had 3 children. I had divorced. No, that was before because this was the past. Okay, I had gotten married and I had 3 kids. And at that time, I was a single mom. And my parents had asked if the kids could come to visit them because we lived 800 miles away from my parents and they didn't get to see them often. So they went to see my parents. And this was the first time I had any time to myself. And I was alone at the time. And so I wanted to go buy flowers. It was June, early June. And so that day I went and had coffee with a friend and then went and bought flowers and was on my way home. And while I was on my way home, I was thinking about all the flowers and I had failed to fasten my seatbelt. And I was in the middle lane. I had pulled out of the nursery and was in the middle lane. And I was only about a block away from the nursery, and I had stopped at the first stoplight outside of the nursery, and that had cycled. There was no cars in the area at the time. The ones that I could see were so far off in the distance, they were of no concern. So I waited while the light cycled, and then I proceeded through the intersection, and there was 3 lanes going in both directions. And I was in the middle lane going toward my home. There was a big hill, and it had a big dip in the road. And so I was going down that hill, and I could see that there was one car ahead of me, and I noticed it didn't seem to be moving. So I surveyed the situation, my analytical mind. I was always analyzing things, and there was a park on the left side of the road and a grassy area on the right, weeds, because it was overgrown. And I knew that car was stopped. So I stopped behind it, because I didn't know what was in front of it or what the reason why it was stopped, because there was no road crossing there, no cross signal. There was virtually no reason for it to be stopped there. So I thought maybe a child had crossed the road on its way, cutting through to go home. And I didn't know which direction it might be going. So I chose to stop behind the car for safety's sake, because I wouldn't want to, hit something if I went around. And I had time. I was on vacation. Then all this traffic that had been in the distance had not caught up through while I was sitting at that stop sign, and it was now barreling down the hill toward us, and every lane was full, and the person in the lane behind me was a pickup truck. And I noticed when I looked in my rearview mirror, he was looking to his right. I don't know if he was thinking about changing lanes or if somebody was in there or what the situation was, but I knew he wasn't going to have time to stop. And so when I knew that, and I thought about my seatbelt, and I knew I wasn't going to have time to fasten my seatbelt. If I fumbled at all, my face would be smashed against the steering wheel. So I said, "Oh my God, he's going to hit me." Said that in my mind. "Oh my God, he's going to hit me." Just by that thought and them hearing our thoughts, I heard a voice say, "Lay down across the seat and cover your face." I was the only one in the car. So where was his voice coming from? So I did as I was told. I laid down across the seat and I covered my face. The truck smashed in and demolished the back of my car. And that first collision, threw my body back against the backs of the seat, knocked them down, and threw me back into the back seat. And my back seat was kind of caved in where my body hit. Fortunately, I didn't go over the seat, because I would have been because I had a hatchback at that time, and I would have been where the flowers were, which no longer existed. So I was very lucky that I was in the back seat. Well, then that collision, the force of that one pushed my car into the car in front of me. And then my body was going to be propelled forward then. But instead, I felt a big arm come under my shoulders. And I was picked up by some spiritual being that I couldn't see, but I could feel. And then I was up in another dimension, looking down on the accident scene through a cloud in the sky, even though there was no clouds in this world. So that cloud I was looking through was obviously the veil that separates our world from the heavenly world. And I was peeking down on my accident scene, because I could feel the touch of angelic beings on my arms above my elbows as I watched. And once the collision settled, I was snapped back into my body. And I found it interesting that in that one, I was in another dimension looking down on this one. The ambulance came. I was actually back in the front seat where I started. What had happened was, because the window I saw shattering, because I saw a window shattering in slow motion. And that was the rear window. That was when I was in the back seat. And then when the car was forced into the car in front of me, my body was ricocheted, physical body was ricocheted off the roof and back down into the seat where I was initially at. And the front window was still intact. I was fine. I mean, I sat up and my head hurt tremendously. They called an ambulance, and I went to the hospital. I don't remember the ride. I don't remember seeing a doctor or nurses, although I know I did. Uh, there was blood spattered on my shirt. That must have been from blood tests or something. And so a police officer came in to get my information. That was the only time I became lucid because, when you're kind of at attention when a police officer comes in. But I couldn't explain much. I told him he asked for my driver's license and I couldn't find it in my purse. He said, "That's okay, I'll look it up." And everything was fine. I was released from the hospital that day when I finally came back into my body. So during that time frame, I don't know where I was because I don't remember that time frame from the ambulance into the hospital or even seeing a doctor. But I know I did because I was hooked up to what do they call those intravenous fluids, etc. So, and it was in the emergency room, so I had to have seen somebody. My friend picked me up, my coworker, and gave me a ride over to see my car, which was totally demolished. And then she gave me a ride home. So I went to work and had muscle trauma. I didn't have any broken bones, but I had muscle trauma. And I carried on with life because, I didn't have anybody to visit at home. The kids weren't there. So I was bored. I would rather work and keep myself busy. So I tried doing that, but it was hard. And then I had to go through physical therapy for about a year to get my muscles back to normal. And I continue to exercise to this day because of the pain, comes back if I don't continue the exercises. So because muscles have memory. So so that explained that second one. And I found it interesting that when they save you, there's a scripture, and I pick out these certain ones because after I met Jesus, I thought, well, I better read the Bible because I'd never read it before. So when I read it, all these things started popping out at me. Not everything, but just certain things like the silver cord, and when he sends his angels to protect you, and you will honor him. Well, then I felt I felt like my life, it was a shambles because after that I started getting electrical shocks, which they said was from the car accident, which I'm not so sure because I think a lot of that is when the spirit is activating. Medication helped that and eased it over the years, and it's gone now. So no problems with that. I didn't have anybody in my sphere that had any knowledge about near-death experiences. So I just kind of kept silent. I eventually shared it with my daughter a few years later when I came across a book and from Sylvia Browne. And this happened because my daughter came to me. She was in college at the time, and she said, "I'm having really bad dreams, Mom. Can you help me figure out what they're about?" And I said, "Sure." So I wanted to help my daughter, so we went to the bookstore because I know nothing about dreams, and my eyes were magnetically taken to a book, and I felt, well, this has got to be the book I'm supposed to read. So I picked it up, and it's one of Sylvia Browne's books, and it was about dreams. So I read the book, and we discovered, Gina's problem, and her dreams went away. And at the very end of the book was a clip from her next book was about what happens when we die. And as she explained everything that had happened to me. And I said, oh my God, that, and now I've got I've got an answer. And so I started my search, and I started visiting psychics because everything was telepathic. And I was wondering if they got their information telepathically and how can this be used, etc. And also because I came back being aware of other dimensions, and I could see um, cats, a cat coming up our basement steps, and it looked like one that was in the barn, and it was walking across in front of the washer and dryer toward the library where I was. And I was looking out the door, and we locked eyes, and it was walked toward me, and then it rotated its head to the right and walked through the back door that was closed. So I could see some spiritual beings, animals, and I eventually see my brother Doug as well, because that was one of the future things, because the future moments started happening then, and it revealed that more to the story, that things in our life are planned, because these were moments when I was pre-kindergarten age. I had heard my mom talking on the phone about adoption and with a friend. And so I asked her, am I adopted, Mom? And she said, no, silly, you're our little girl. But then I said, okay, but I'm going to die young. And I had visions of 3 different ages go through in front of me. And those were the ages I had my 3 near-death experiences. So those 3 near-death experiences were planned. And so I think each one of these moments he was showing me were planned events of my life, which included my brother's death. And it included a white building with the word namaste over it. And that I find very interesting, because when I went there, I was going for a soul painting because I was very interested in spirituality. And I found a coupon of a soul painting for so much off a soul painting. So my daughter and I both went. And this was the white building he showed me. And when I walked down to her office, here's the word namaste outside of her office door. And a soul painting is that she connects with the heavenly records, and the gatekeeper shows her things that she's supposed to paint that are supposed to be important to the sitter. And she painted my near-death experience. So I saw that, and I looked at my daughter. It was an hour session, and 45 minutes in, I recognized it. And I looked at Gina and I says, you recognize that? She said, yes, I do. Because she's the only one I had shared the experience with at this point. And I was blown away. What am I supposed to do with this? Because I knew he was telling me I needed to do something with it. And at that same time frame, Heaven is for Real came out. And the little boy Colton saw the same Jesus that I saw. So when I went to his movie, I said, oh, there he is, there he is. Same Jesus. And so I was just totally shaken. And so I finally knew I was supposed to share everything. And I said a prayer, and I said, I don't know what you want me to do. Just tell me. Because I had evaluated my strengths and my weaknesses, and I knew that I couldn't write a book, and I didn't think I'd be a very good speaker, because I was a very shy person, quiet. I wanted to remain invisible in my comfort zone. And so I worded my prayer so as, please just tell me what to do. And if you don't tell me, I will know it's just for me, and I don't have to share with anybody. So I went to sleep that night thinking, okay, I'm not going to get an answer, and I don't have to do anything. And the next morning I woke up. Just as I was waking up, I saw visions, and Jesus said, make it about me. And he showed me writing a book, and he showed me standing in front of people talking about it. So then I knew I had to write the book, which I did, Dying to See, Revelations about God, Jesus, our pathways, and our nature of the soul. I had to sit down and analyze all these situations, and it showed that we have soul contracts. The beautiful girl in my first near-death experience is my daughter. At that time, she wasn't not going to be born until 15 years later. It was only after she was in college and somebody had taken a picture of her in exactly the same pose, well, close to the same pose, that I recognized that was the music box lady, because I had already drawn the picture of her, and I've got pictures of it in my book, of the accident scenes, of my drawings that I've done, and of my daughter Gina next to the music box lady. No doubt that was her. And she was reminding me that if we had a contract, and if I didn't get back into my body that night, she wouldn't be born 15 years later. And I obviously had a contract to be there with my son Kurt, and that's why I knew something was going to happen with him. And I know my son Phil also has contracts. He's kind of has helped each one of us in certain ways, and stabled the waters through life in difficult situations. So we work with people throughout our life, and work together with different souls. So our paths cross for a certain reason, and that person's there for us to either take advantage of some knowledge that they have, or some help that they can give us, or we're there to assist with them. And that's the important thing, because we're supposed to lift each other up with love. Because as I sat down in Jan's body, my physical spirit being sat down in Jan's body, I heard an echoing voice from heaven. All the while I re-entered, and it kept repeating, love is the only thing that matters. Love is the only thing that matters. And that's what heaven wants us all to know, is that love is the only thing that matters. And that's the thing that's important.
I know that you have a website. You also have a YouTube channel.
Mhm.
What other activities are you doing to help people?
Well, I'm considering putting together a class. I have so many things going, it's hard to get time for another thing, but I'm considering, if I get enough interest, putting together a class to analyze your lessons, looking back on your life. Because I have in my book a small section on how you can look back on your life and find the lessons that you're learning here. Because if a lesson keeps cycling, you haven't learned the lesson. Because even if you have learned and you haven't implemented your lessons, then it will keep cycling. So you have to look back at the moments in your life that are predominant, who were there, and you'll come to realize that you have soul contracts with these certain people, and they're in your life for a reason. It could be a difficult situation. We all have difficult people in our lives, some worse than others, but they're there to help us learn resiliency and forgiveness, or to let us know we're valuable people, and not to take it anymore. So it's all lessons and love.
If you want to give out your email.
Janet Tarantino, author, at gmail.com. And all my links, my social media links, are on my website, and you can contact me through the contact section of my website, which is janettarantino.com. Yeah, you can contact me. We can talk about whatever you need to talk about. I'm always open to helping people.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.